The truck skidded sideways on the wet gravel, its back tires fishtailing near the edge of the ravine. Matteo gripped the wheel, heart-hammering eyes locked on the narrow mountain road that had vanished beneath a sudden downpour. A second ago, it had just been dust and silence. Now the rain came like a warning, fast, hard, reckless, bouncing off the windshield and blurring everything beyond it. Leah screamed from the passenger seat, her seatbelt holding her firm as the vehicle jerked again. "Dad, I got it." Matteo barked more to convince himself than her. He wrestled the truck back in line, the tires catching just enough grit to keep them from sliding off the edge. Inches away, the earth dropped into shadow and pine, the kind of fall that didn't give second chances. When the truck finally stilled, rumbling low, both of them sat frozen. Matteo's hands clenched the wheel. Rain tapped the roof like ticking seconds. Leah's voice broke the silence, soft, trembling. "Are we still alive?" He exhaled. "Yeah, for now." She looked over, her brown eyes wide. That wasn't the best turn. Noted. He turned off the engine and sat back, heart still pounding. The road ahead was more of a suggestion than a path, a crooked line carved along the side of Sleeping Ute Mountain. His grandfather had loved this place. Matteo had no idea why. The storm moved on quickly, as mountain storms do. In 5 minutes, the rain was just a memory. Water streamed off the rocks and trees, soaking the already muddy road. Matteo opened the door and stepped out, boots sinking into the soft earth. The sky was clearing, orange streaks of sunset pressing against the blue. Somewhere far below, the town of Cortez lay quiet and distant, a sprawl of lights blinking on in the twilight. Up here, the world was something else, quiet, raw, older than anything Matteo could explain. He walked around to check the tires, still inflated. The back one had been close, too close. If he'd taken that corner 2 miles an hour faster. "Are we still going?" Leah asked, climbing down beside him. He nodded, brushing his hands on his jeans. "Yeah, we're close." She craned her neck toward the narrow road, then looked at the dense pine forest around them. "It's like the mountain wants us to leave." Matteo didn't answer. She wasn't wrong. They got back in the truck, rolling forward slowly now, wheels biting through the softened path. The last few bends were cautious and quiet. No music, no talk. Just the steady clunk of tires over rocks and the occasional call of a raven overhead. Then the trees opened. The cabin stood in a clearing like it had been dropped there 100 years ago and forgotten. Half the porch sagged toward the ground, its beams rotting from years of snow and sun. One window was broken, and the roofline dipped dangerously in the middle. The wood had gone gray with age, and a dead pine leaned across the back corner like a crutch. It was smaller than Matteo remembered. He parked just inside the clearing, cut the engine, and stepped out again. The air smelled like wet dirt and pine needles. No traffic, no voices, just wind and the groan of the old structure adjusting to the drop in temperature. "This is it?" Leah asked, hugging herself against the sudden chill. "This is it." She looked at him with that too-old look she'd picked up since the divorce. "They laughed at you for this." He didn't answer. She turned her face to the cabin. "But Grandpa wanted you to have it." "Yeah." They approached slowly, boots crunching through the wet gravel and pine needles. Matteo tested each step on the porch before letting his weight down. One board cracked but held. He reached for the handle, rusted iron cold, and turned it. The door opened with a low groan. Inside, the air was still the kind that had nowhere left to go. It smelled of rot and dust, wood smoke from a fire long past, maybe even something older. The cabin had one main room, and a small offshoot to the side that might have been a sleeping area. There was a table with one good leg, a stove rusted shut, shelves stripped bare except for a tin plate and a broken cup. "It's like time stopped in here," Leah said, stepping softly. Matteo nodded. "Or like time got tired and left." They walked the space together, not speaking. Leah touched the frame of the bed, her fingers trailing across spider webs. Matteo crouched near the stove, brushing aside a pile of old ash. Everything was quiet, not peaceful, just waiting. He stood slowly, joints aching. Then something caught his eye. A corner of the floor near the back of the main room where the boards didn't quite match. He crossed over, knelt down, and ran his fingers along the seams. Leah came over. "What is it?" "This board's been lifted before." He pressed, and it shifted. Not much, but enough. Working carefully, he pried it loose. Beneath was a narrow gap, a hiding place just wide enough to fit an old tin. He reached in and pulled it out. The lid was rusted, but it opened with a twist. Inside, folded paper yellowed and brittle. He opened it carefully. A photo fell out, grainy and black and white. A man stood in front of this very cabin, younger and proud, wearing a miner's hat. Behind him, barely visible in the shadows of the open doorway, was a shaft descending into blackness. Matteo turned over the photo. Written in faded pencil, Ezekiel Yazzie, 1897. There were other papers, a land deed survey notes, and a folded map drawn in a shaking hand. Leah looked over his shoulder. "Who's Ezekiel?" Matteo didn't answer. He stared at the name again. The surname was familiar. His own. At the bottom of the tin under the papers lay something else, something heavier. He pulled it out and turned it in his hand. An old brass pocket watch. He opened it. It still ticked. Inscribed inside were words he hadn't seen in years. To Matteo, time reveals all truths. He closed the watch and looked at the photo again, then at the trap door in the image. He rose, scanning the floor around him, heart thudding. Then he saw it. Near the back wall, beneath a dusty rug, the faint outline of a trap door. A rusted iron ring at its center. Leah followed his gaze. "Is that what I think it is?" He crossed the room, lifted the rug, and brushed the dust away. The trap door was locked with a combination latch. 3 numbers. The kind of lock a kid could guess 1,000 times and still get wrong. Matteo took a breath and turned the watch over. Engraved beneath the inscription was a date, March 11th, 1955. He tried 555. The lock clicked. The iron ring creaked as he pulled the hatch open, revealing blackness beneath. Leah stepped closer, peering in. "Where does it go?" Matteo looked down into the dark, the air rising cold and sharp. "Let's find out." "Some roads don't lead forward. They lead back to the part of you that you left behind." The hatch creaked open like it hadn't been touched in decades. Matteo held the flashlight steady, the narrow beam piercing the black below. The edges of a wooden ladder descended into the darkness, its rungs half swallowed by shadow. He crouched beside the opening, the damp air rising to meet him. It smelled of iron stone and time, like the earth had been holding its breath. Leah knelt beside him, her small frame tense. "Are we going down there?" "Not yet." He reached out and tested the top rung. It groaned but held. "We need better gear. Ropes, lights, something more than a half-dead flashlight and boots from Target." "But we found it," she whispered. "It's real." Matteo nodded, eyes still fixed on the blackness. The picture of Ezekiel standing at the door, the old map, the watch, it was all real. His grandfather had known. And now it was his. He closed the hatch, gently locking it again, with the same 3 digits. Then he slid the rug back over the seam, hiding it from view. The cabin, as broken and forgotten as it looked, was hiding something. And if what they'd seen in those papers was even half true, it wasn't just treasure buried down there. It was a story. A promise. Maybe a secret someone had been protecting for 100 years. They spent the night at the cabin curled up in sleeping bags Mateo had stashed in the truck. The firewood stacked by the stove was still dry, covered in an old tarp. He managed to get a fire going, and the stove gave off enough heat to push the cold from the room. Leah fell asleep, curled on her side, the pocket watch tucked under her arm like it was made of gold. Mateo sat awake by the stove, the tin box open in his lap, Ezekiel's photo resting against his leg. He stared at the man's face, the jawline, the eyes, the stance, and wondered if it was blood or fate that tied them. Rain started again after midnight, tapping on the roof in soft waves. Mateo listened to it, the rhythm steady, like the mountain had decided to speak in code. He couldn't understand it yet, but he would. In the morning, they headed back down the mountain. The truck moved slowly on the wet gravel, Mateo gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. The sun filtered through the clouds, revealing slivers of gold across the mesa and canyons far below. Every mile felt like driving out of a dream, back into a world that didn't believe in buried journals or blood-bound promises. Leah sat quietly, hugging her backpack. The tin was tucked inside it, along with the pocket watch and map. "Do you think Grandpa knew what was down there?" "I think he knew everything," Mateo said. "He just didn't think I was ready until now." At the edge of town, the gas station still had the same dusty ice machine and faded soda signs from when Mateo was a kid. He pulled in and fueled up. While he pumped, Leah wandered into the attached store. When she came back out, she had a chocolate milk and a folded paper bag. "Got you something," she said, handing it over. Inside was a sandwich. Ham and cheese, his favorite as a kid. "You remember," he said. "You always get cranky if you don't eat." He smiled. Fair point. They finished eating in the truck. Then Mateo turned toward the far side of Cortez, where the general store sat on the edge of Main Street. The wooden sign read, "Sandoval's Supply." Letters faded but proud. Inside it smelled like old leather and kerosene. The bell above the door jingled as they stepped in. A man in his 70s stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled to the elbow, eyes sharp beneath a battered cowboy hat. He looked up, blinking. Then he smiled. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "You're Javier's grandson." Mateo froze. It had been years since anyone had called his grandfather by his first name. "Yes, sir." Mateo Yazzie. The man stepped around the counter and offered a firm handshake. "Ray Sandoval. I sold your granddad lantern oil and survey flags for 30 years. Good man. Quiet, though. Didn't talk much unless it was about rocks or his granddaughter. I was the grandson." Ray squinted. "Well, then he didn't brag enough." "What brings you back?" Mateo hesitated. Inherited the old place up near the ridge. Ray nodded slowly. "The cabin." "Yeah. I figured we'd take a look. Make a trip out of it." "You staying up there just a day or two?" Ray studied him for a long moment, then turned and started gathering supplies. "You'll need rope. A good flashlight, not one of those cheap things. And batteries. Fire starter too if you're gonna be poking around." "You knew he went up there a lot," Ray chuckled. "Course I did. He came in every few months like clockwork. Bought things nobody needs for a vacation, climbing gear, core samplers, even a rock tumbler once. Said he liked the quiet. Did he ever say why? Nope. And I didn't ask." Ray placed the supplies on the counter. "But I know a man who's digging for peace when I see one. Whatever he was doing, it mattered to him. Mateo paid in cash, thanked him, and turned to leave. "Hey," Ray said, stopping him. "Your granddad, he wasn't afraid to be alone with the mountain. That's rare. Don't let folks laugh you out of it." Back in the truck, Leah buckled in without a word. Her silence was thoughtful, not scared. Mateo looked at her. "You okay?" She nodded, then said, "You think it's really a mine?" He turned on the engine. "I think it's something." They drove past the edge of town down into the dry lowlands where the red earth stretched for miles. In the distance, Sleeping Ute Mountain loomed massive, ancient, a warrior lying on his back with arms folded. "I read about him," Leah said. "In the school library. The Ute believe he was wounded in a great battle and went to sleep so he could heal." Mateo glanced at her. "You believe that?" She shrugged. "I believe mountains keep secrets." He didn't answer. He was too busy thinking about Ezekiel's journal, the map, and the hatch in the floor. And the face in the photo, looking back through time like it still had something to say. The road rose again, carving its way toward the ridge. The cabin waited. And under it, whatever Ezekiel had buried, whatever Mateo's grandfather had protected, it was still there. Still hidden. Still watching. If you're standing here reading this, you found the mine. But have you found the reason it was hidden? The trapdoor creaked open again, and this time Mateo didn't hesitate. He had the good flashlight now, the kind Ray Sandoval said would slice darkness clean in half. It lit up the shaft like a tunnel into bone-wooden rungs, descending along rock walls that glistened faintly with condensation. The smell hit first deep earth, old metal, and the bitter scent of time. Leah stood above, hands gripping the doorframe, her knuckles pale. "Be careful." "I will," Mateo said. "Stay close to the door. If I yell, close it, and run to the truck." She didn't answer right away. Then she nodded, brave as ever, even though her chin trembled. Mateo clipped the flashlight to his belt, took a breath, and stepped onto the ladder. Each rung held, though some groaned beneath his weight. 30 feet down, the ladder ended at solid stone. He stepped off carefully, boots crunching against grit and broken rock. He swung the flashlight around. The tunnel was narrower than he expected, maybe 5 feet wide, 7 high, carved by hand and reinforced with wooden beams, most still intact. He passed his fingers along the nearest one. Newer than the rest. Grandpa had been down here recently. Not decades ago, within the last few years. Maybe months. The light fell on something just ahead. A small wooden crate sat off to the side, half covered in dust. Mateo opened it slowly. Ore. Rock. Rough chunks of stone veined with streaks of metallic silver. He turned one in his palm. It was cold and heavier than it looked. He remembered his grandfather showing him something like this when he was a boy, but it hadn't meant anything then. Just rocks. Now it felt like holding a piece of a hidden world. He moved deeper. The tunnel stretched maybe 50 yards before widening into a chamber tall and round, the ceiling crisscrossed with support beams. Crates lined the walls, not many, maybe 6 in total, and in the center was a work table built from stacked stone and worn planks. Papers were scattered across its surface, pinned beneath old tools, a chisel, a rusted hand, pick, a half-empty lantern. Mateo swept the light over the walls. Marks were carved into the stone tally lines, notes, symbols he didn't recognize. In one corner, a rusted coffee tin held more ore samples, and there, resting on the table's edge, was a book. Leather-bound, cracked and dry with age. He picked it up slowly, brushing dust from the cover. The spine read in faded letters. Journal of Ezekiel Yazzie, March 1897. His heart beat louder in his ears. He opened it. The first pages were stiff but readable. The handwriting was careful, almost artistic. Ezekiel had written in long, looping script, full sentences dated entries, observations of the land, the veins he followed, the tools he used, and eventually the people he met. April 18th, 1897. I have staked my claim on the northern ridge. The rock is good. I believe the silver vein continues deeper. This land speaks to me. I have no right to ignore it. Mateo flipped further. June 9th, 1897. There are signs others came long before me. Markings on the walls. Fragments of pottery in the lower chamber. I am not the first to seek the mountain's secrets. He kept reading page after page. Ezekiel's tone shifted from excitement to reverence. He spoke of finding not just wealth, but purpose. August 3rd, 1897. A Ute elder passed near camp today. We did not speak, but he saw me working and did not interfere. I felt something pass between us, not warning, but wait, as if I was being watched for something more than silver. Mateo stopped there. The page's corner was folded. He could feel the moment's gravity the way Ezekiel had tried to mark the beginning of something. A deeper silence filled the chamber. Not just quiet, but presence, as if the mine itself were listening. He turned to a final entry. If you're standing here reading this, you found the mine. But have you found the reason it was hidden? The silver is only one truth. The mountain holds others. I have seen them. I have promised to protect them. If you are Yazi by blood, you carry this promise now. Do not take lightly what was buried for a reason. Mateo let the book fall shut. His hands trembled. He hadn't known what he was hoping to find down here. Treasure closure. A connection to the man who raised him. But this was something else entirely. A legacy. A responsibility. His flashlight passed over the remaining crates. He opened another tools, most of them worn from use, others pristine, likely never touched. One box held candles, another something wrapped in oilcloth. He unfolded it. A second, smaller journal. Older still. The leather nearly black from age. Inside were pages of sketches, mineral veins, cave layouts, and in the margins, Ute symbols drawn with respectful care. He felt Leah's voice before he heard it. Dad. I'm okay, he called back, voice echoing. I don't like being up here alone. I'm coming up. He pocketed the journals and picked up a few of the cleaner ore samples. Then he climbed the ladder, careful and slow, his legs shaking more from awe than effort. When he reached the surface, Leah was sitting by the door with her knees pulled to her chest. She stood when he emerged, eyes wide. You were gone forever. Mateo stepped out and pulled the hatch closed. 10 minutes. Felt like an hour. He smiled. Sorry. She glanced at the dust on his jacket, then at the thick old journal in his hand. You found something. He nodded and sat down heavily on the floor, laying the journal between them. She leaned in close as he opened it again. This belonged to a man named Ezekiel Yazi, he said. He found the silver. But he also found something else. Leah ran her fingers gently over the ink. Is he family? I think so. Then this is ours. Mateo paused. No. I think it's ours to protect. Leah's face changed, not just curiosity now, but understanding. Like some part of her already knew the weight of the mine of the Journal of Promises, written down in dark places. They spent the next few hours cleaning the cabin and logging everything they'd found. Mateo made digital copies of the pages, using his phone photographing every detail, the journal, the sketches, the survey map tucked into the crate. He stored the originals in a waterproof bag and placed them in the truck's locked toolbox. They'd come up the mountain out of obligation. They were leaving it with something close to destiny. Before packing up, Mateo stood at the window looking toward the west, where sleeping Ute Mountain sat in silence under a slow-turning sky. The clouds had cleared, and the sun spread long amber rays across the ridge. Leah walked up beside him. "Do you think Grandpa knew all this was here?" she asked. "I think he knew more than he ever said." She nodded. "Then why didn't he tell anyone?" Mateo looked down at the journal in his hands. At the date. At the careful script of a man who dug through stone to find meaning, not money. Because maybe the truth waits for the right person to find it. That night, they drove back to town in silence, but something had changed. The mountain didn't feel like it loomed anymore. It felt like it watched, like it remembered, like it was waiting to see what Mateo would do next. There are places where men dug for gold and found their own reflection, greedy, blind, and broken. The sun was rising when Mateo and Leah pulled into the driveway of their modest rental outside Cortez. The truck creaked as it settled its bed heavy with packed gear and crates. Mateo shut off the engine and sat still for a moment, hands resting on the wheel. His shirt clung damp against his back, sweat dried into the collar dirt ground into the cuffs. The mine's air had followed him home, clinging to his clothes, pressed into his skin. Leah leaned her head against the window. Her hair was tangled from sleep and mountain wind. She didn't ask a single question the whole way down. She didn't need to. Inside the house smelled like dust and books, the leftovers of a school teacher's life, packed into too many boxes. Mateo carried in the waterproof bag, journals, and map inside. He didn't put them on the bookshelf or on the kitchen counter. He opened the hallway closet, pulled the boxes aside, and tucked the bag beneath the floorboard that creaked when you stepped too far to the left. He laid it gently, like setting a fragile truth back into the earth. Then he closed it and stood staring down. He didn't feel peace. He felt watched. Later that afternoon, after a shower and 3 mugs of coffee that did nothing to steady his hands, Mateo drove alone into town. He didn't take Leah. Not this time. The museum was small, nestled between a jewelry shop and a used bookstore. The wooden sign above the entrance read, Cortez Historical Society, but half the windows were covered in posters about local music nights and craft fairs. Inside, the air was cool and stale. A single volunteer manned the desk, a college-aged kid wearing a Mesa Verde sweatshirt and earbuds he didn't bother removing when Mateo walked in. "Someone here who knows Ute mining history?" Mateo asked. The kid blinked slowly. "Probably Miss Lena. She's in the back cataloging." Mateo followed the hall past faded photographs and display cases filled with arrowheads and rusted tools. In the last room, amid a clutter of boxes and paperwork, a woman knelt beside an old glass cabinet. She looked up, black hair twisted into a low braid, sharp eyes, a pencil tucked behind one ear. She stood and brushed her hands on her jeans, giving Mateo a long, unreadable look. "You don't look like a tourist." "I'm not." She waited. "My name's Mateo Yazzie. I think you knew my grandfather." "Javier." She tilted her head slightly. "Yazzie." He nodded. Her face changed just enough to show recognition and something else. "I'm Lena Blackbear," she said. "I work with the Tribal Cultural Office. Your grandfather and I met a few times. He wasn't much for conversation." "That sounds about right." "What brings you here?" Mateo pulled the small envelope from his jacket, a copy of the photograph he'd found in the mine. He handed it to her without a word. She studied it for a long moment. This is Ezekiel, so he's real. She looked up sharply. You didn't know I knew the name. I didn't know he looked like me until I saw the picture. Lena walked to a filing cabinet and pulled a slim binder. Inside were several photographs, maps, and typed pages. She turned it toward him, flipping carefully. He was born in 1869, she said. Half Ute. Left the tribe in his 20s or was pushed out depending on who you ask. Showed up later as a miner. Some say he struck silver. Some say he found something else. Mateo nodded. I've been to the site. Her hand paused mid-turn. Excuse me, the cabin. The mine. I found a journal. You went into the mine, I had to. Lena set the binder down slowly. That land. It's not just a claim. It sits on what we believe was once a ceremonial route. There are stories passed down about it. Protected spaces. Places that were never meant to be disturbed. Mateo thought of the chamber. The symbols. The quiet that pressed against him like stone hands. It's still intact, he said. Your stories. They're not wrong. Lena stared at him like she was seeing past his skin down to the marrow. Did your grandfather ever tell you why he kept that land? No. He left it to me with no explanation. She crossed her arms. Typical. Old men and their secrets. He pulled the map from his pocket, the one Ezekiel had sketched. He laid it on the table. She leaned in. That's the ridge, she said. And this symbol, she tapped a spiraled mark, is one we use to denote protected ceremonial space. It shows up in petroglyphs all over this region. Mateo's voice was tight. Then Ezekiel knew what he was digging into. He must have. And your grandfather must have known too. He came to me once years ago asking about what kind of protections exist for tribal land that was never formally documented. He was trying to protect it. Lena nodded. I believe he was. But without documentation, it's complicated. Legally, if it's on private property, it's up to the owner. Unless we can prove cultural significance. Mateo swallowed. Can I show you what I found? Lena hesitated, then gave a single nod. Yes. But I want an elder to see it too. Someone who understands the old ways better than I do. Who Raymond Whitehorse. The name landed with a kind of gravity Mateo couldn't explain. He'd heard it before. As a kid in whispers. A storyteller. A man who never left the mountain, some said. A man who knew more than he ever wrote down. I'll take you both up there, Mateo said. Tomorrow. Lena nodded. And for a moment there was nothing but the quiet hum of the museum lights between them. Outside, the sun was beginning to sink behind the ridge. Mateo stood on the sidewalk staring at the outline of the mountain in the distance. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the pocket watch. It ticked softly, each click like a question. He looked at the sky, orange fading into purple, and still sleeping Ute watched. When he returned home, Leah was drawing at the kitchen table. She looked up with tired eyes. Did you find someone who believes you? He set the watch on the table between them. Yeah, he said. And she's bringing someone else. Leah nodded. Good. She pointed to the paper in front of her. It was a sketch, the mine tunnel, the ladder, the chamber with the table. And at the top, in a child's careful handwriting, she had written heap out sacred ground. Mateo stared at it for a long time. I think you understand more than I do, he murmured. Leah shrugged. I just listen better. That night he dreamed of drums. Not music, but something slower, deeper. A heartbeat through stone. the sound of the earth trying to speak. He gave his word to our people, and for 100 years that mountain held its breath waiting for someone to keep it. The old Jeep kicked up a trail of dust as it wound its way up the mountain road. Mateo sat behind the wheel, hands steady but jaw tight. Beside him, Lena studied the landscape with a calm that came from knowing it deeply, the trees, the cuts in the ridge, the places where time had folded in on itself. In the back seat, Elder Raymond Whitehorse rode in silence. The old man didn't need to ask questions. His gaze rested out the window, distant and unreadable. He wore a dark wool jacket despite the warmth, and his hands folded in his lap were as still as carved stone. The cabin appeared through the trees like a ghost that never left. Mateo parked in the same spot, engine humming down to a nervous stillness. Whitehorse didn't move right away. He took a long breath, then opened the door and stepped out slowly. His boots sank lightly into the soft earth. Mateo and Lena followed him toward the porch. This place, Whitehorse said, was quiet for many years. "I didn't know," Mateo said. "No, you weren't supposed to yet." Lena looked at him. "What do you mean?" Whitehorse didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked the perimeter of the cabin, as if reacquainting himself with something half-remembered. When he returned, he looked at Mateo. "Show me." Inside the cabin, Mateo knelt at the rug, lifted it, and unlocked the trapdoor. The hatch moaned open like before, releasing the cold breath of stone and history. Whitehorse didn't flinch. "I'll go first," Mateo said. Lena touched his arm. "I'm right behind you." They climbed down one at a time, the flashlight casting long shadows across the ladder. The tunnel welcomed them in with its ancient silence. At the chamber, the light flicked across the scattered crates and the old work table. Mateo showed them the journals, the sketches, the symbols carved into the rock. Whitehorse moved slowly, touching nothing. He approached the far wall, the one marked with the spiral symbol, and rested his palm against it. His eyes closed. For a long while he didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was low and grave. "This is the mark of passage. It's a symbol placed near sites used for ceremonial crossings between worlds, between lives. It is not drawn lightly." Mateo swallowed. Did Ezekiel know what he was building over Whitehorse turned? He didn't build over it. He built to protect it. Lena stepped closer, but he mined it. Whitehorse nodded once. He dug. But when he realized what he found, he made a vow to our people, a personal one. He promised to guard what lay deeper, to let the mountain breathe. That vow was passed to your grandfather, Mateo, and now it waits for you. Mateo leaned against the table, the weight of the moment pressing hard into his chest. "How did my grandfather even know any of this?" I told him. That answer came without fanfare. Whitehorse looked at the stone floor as he spoke. "I was 20 when I first came here with him. He was already quiet, already carrying something he didn't fully understand. I helped him see it." Mateo's hands curled into fists. "He never told me." "He was waiting," Whitehorse said simply. "For you to be ready." Lena crossed her arms. And now Whitehorse turned to her. "Now he's gone, and the land waits again." Silence filled the space between them. Then Mateo spoke. "If it's sacred, shouldn't we seal it off, make sure no one ever digs again?" Whitehorse didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the far side of the chamber and knelt beside a stack of stones. With surprising ease, he shifted them aside, revealing a narrow opening barely wider than a child. "This is the mouth of the deeper chamber," he said. "What Ezekiel called the heart. No one's passed through since him. Not even Javier. Mateo stepped forward. You want me to go in, I want you to decide what happens next. But not in ignorance. Mateo looked at the tunnel. His pulse pounded like a second heartbeat. It's safe, it's a place meant to be remembered, Whitehorse said. It will hold. He turned on the flashlight again, crouched, and slipped through the narrow space. The passage curved downward and then opened into a room unlike anything he'd seen. It wasn't just natural, it was shape-designed. The walls bore carvings, figures, mid-dance circles within circles. In the center sat a stone altar covered in dust but still intact. Around it were ceramic fragments, bone beads, a mask carved from ashwood. It felt older than stories, like the land itself had held its breath for centuries just to protect this one room. Mateo stood there for a long time. Then he climbed back up and told them what he saw. Lena's eyes were wide. That needs to be documented properly, protected legally. Whitehorse nodded. The tribe will begin that process, but we need your help. Mine, you hold the deed. That land is still yours, unless you choose to give it back. Mateo looked between them. I don't want to own it, he said, but I don't want someone else tearing it apart either. Then make it official, Lena said. There's a legal framework for heritage co-management. We can draft an agreement. You'd retain rights, but the site would be under cultural protection. Mateo let the idea settle. It felt right. Like locking a door not to shut others out, but to keep something sacred safe inside. I'll sign whatever I need to, he said. Let's make it official. Lena nodded. I'll get the papers started, and we'll need to notify the council. Whitehorse placed a hand on Mateo's shoulder. You've done what few men do. You listened. As they climbed back up into the cabin, the late afternoon sun filtered through the trees. The air was warmer now, lighter, like something had been lifted. Mateo dusted off his hands and turned to them. There's one more thing. He walked out to the truck and pulled out the metal crate with the silver ore samples. He brought them inside and set them on the table. They're valuable, he said. Probably worth something. Lena studied the ore. That's wire silver. Rare. High purity. We could sell it, he said. Use the funds to help preserve the site, set up a scholarship, do something meaningful. Whitehorse nodded slowly. That would honor him. They stood in silence for a long moment, the sound of birds drifting in from the trees. Then Lena pulled a folder from her bag, a legal draft partly filled. Your grandfather already started the paperwork. He never signed it. But he named you. Mateo opened it, heart aching. In the blank space beside Herr Steward, the line waited. He picked up the pen and signed. Outside, the mountain watched. Still. Ancient. Waiting no more. A man who keeps his word may not be rich, but he dies with peace in his bones. The silence in the cabin shifted after Mateo signed the agreement. Not gone still and present like a deep breath being held, but lighter somehow, as if the mountain itself had heard and exhaled, finally releasing the tension of a century. Mateo folded the document and slid it back into the folder. Lena tucked it into her satchel carefully, her fingers lingering on the edge as if she understood the weight of it more than anyone. Council meets Friday, she said. I'll present this myself. Mateo nodded, but his mind was elsewhere, already reaching into the future. He looked around the cabin, the sagging beams, the peeling paint, the windows clouded with dust. There was work to be done, and not just underground. Leah and I can start clearing this place up, he said. If it's going to be part of something lasting, it should look like it matters. You're planning to stay? Lena asked. He hesitated. I don't know yet. But I'm not leaving. Not right now. Whitehorse stood near the doorway, gazing out into the trees. The land doesn't ask you to stay forever, he said. Just to treat it like it's alive. Mateo gave a quiet nod. They left mid-afternoon, Lena and Whitehorse taking the jeep back down the road in a cloud of red dust. Mateo watched until their taillights disappeared around the bend. Then he turned back toward the cabin. Inside, Leah had moved the crates near the wall and was sweeping the dusty floor with a pine bough. She paused when he stepped in. "Did you sign I did?" She smiled. Grandpa would be proud. Mateo's throat tightened unexpectedly. "Yeah," he said, voice rough. "I hope so." They spent the rest of the day clearing out what they could. Mateo used a crowbar to pry away rotten boards from the back porch, replacing them with spare planks from the shed behind the cabin. Leah washed down the windows using a cracked jug and a strip of old cloth, humming softly as she worked. By sundown, the place still looked old, still humble, but it felt different, cared for. That night they lit a fire in the stove and ate sandwiches under a lantern's glow. Outside, wind rustled the pine branches and coyotes called to each other across the canyon. Mateo sat on the porch with his boots kicked up the cool air brushing against his skin, the stars spread thick and bright above. He could have fallen asleep there if it weren't for the sound of tires crunching gravel. He sat up. A pair of headlights edged around the curve in the road and stopped short of the cabin. Mateo stood heart-thumping. The truck door opened and a familiar voice called out. "Well, well, looks like the mountain shack still stands." Mateo sighed before the second voice even arrived. Then it did sharper, more amused. "We were sure it would have collapsed by now, or been turned into a coyote hotel." Two figures stepped into the lantern light. Jordan and Celeste, his siblings. Jordan wore a canvas jacket far too clean for the terrain and mirrored sunglasses despite the dark. Celeste stood beside him in boots that had clearly never touched mud and a scarf like she'd come from a gallery, not a mountain road. Mateo stepped off the porch slowly. "How'd you find me?" Jordan shrugged. "Public records. You filed for stewardship. Council notice went up. Word travels even in backwoods places." Celeste's smile didn't reach her eyes. "We figured we should come see what our little brother's been up to. You know, since we were left out of the secret inheritance." Mateo felt the old resentment stir bitter and sharp, but he kept his voice level. "You got the properties in Denver, the ranch in Pagosa Springs, the stocks, the money. And you got the shack," Jordan said, smirking. "Funny how that worked out." Mateo folded his arms. "What do you want?" Celeste stepped forward, her heels crunching softly on the gravel. "We heard rumors. Silver. Some kind of historical site. Word is you found something big." "I found family," Mateo said. "History. A legacy worth protecting." Jordan laughed. "That's adorable. But let's be honest. If there's silver down there, that land is worth millions." "It's under tribal protection now," Mateo said. "Cultural stewardship. You can't touch it." Celeste's smile turned cold. "You really think that'll hold up in court? Come on, Mateo. You think a sentimental letter from Grandpa and a dusty old map is enough to lock us out?" Mateo said nothing. "You can cut us in now," Jordan offered, on suddenly softening his tone. "Make this easy. We'll help fund development, restoration, turn it into a historic exhibit or something. Split the revenue." "No." Celeste's face twitched. "Then we'll challenge the will." Mateo stepped down from the porch and met her stare. "Go ahead. But just know I've got more than paper. I've got the truth. and people who will stand with me." He walked past them, headed toward the truck, not waiting to see their reaction. He opened the passenger door, grabbed the ore sample crate, and turned back. He held it out, letting the silver catch the light. "You want to see what Grandpa left me?" They both looked down. Wire silver, pure, unpolished. Enough in that one box to fund years of legal war or something greater. "This isn't a payday," Mateo said. "It's a responsibility, one that neither of you ever earned." He turned and walked back into the cabin. They didn't follow. He closed the door behind him and bolted it. Leah was sitting cross-legged on the floor, the journal in her lap. "Was that Aunt Celeste?" "Yeah," he said, sitting beside her. "And Uncle Jordan." "What did they want?" He stared at the fire. They wanted the part of Grandpa they never understood. She nodded. "They won't stop, will they?" Mateo looked down at her, this strange, old-souled girl who had climbed the mountain beside him, descended into the dark, and seen with clear eyes what grown adults refused to. "No," he said. "They won't. Then we don't either." He smiled, though his chest still felt tight. "No, we don't." The fire cracked softly, and the room fell into quiet. Outside, the wind shifted, curling along the eaves, rattling the pine needles. The mountain was listening. It always had been. Justice doesn't always walk in with a badge. Sometimes it shows up holding a shovel and a promise. The courthouse in Cortez stood like an old sentinel on the corner of Main and Chestnut, sandstone walls, sun-worn and chipped windows dull with age. Mateo adjusted the collar of his only clean shirt as he crossed the sidewalk, briefcase in hand. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't even sure he believed in law the way some folks did. But today he had to believe in something more than silence. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed with low tension. The county clerk, a gray-haired woman named Darla, who remembered his grandfather with a fond smile, waved him toward the side room where the hearing would take place. "They're already here," she said quietly, leaning in. "Your brother's wearing a suit 2 sizes too tight. Looks like he's selling reverse mortgages." Mateo smiled faintly. "That sounds about right." He stepped into the room where a long, rectangular table split the space. At one end sat Jordan, flipping through a leather folio with the impatience of a man used to getting what he wanted. Celeste sat beside him, tapping her nails against a tumbler of iced tea. Across from them were 2 attorneys dressed in sleek navy, whispering into each other's ears. At the other end of the table, Lena sat with a slim laptop and a folder twice as thick as the one Mateo carried. Her eyes flicked up when she saw him, and her nod was subtle but sure. She was ready. Raymond Whitehorse sat beside her, calm as stone hands folded across his lap. He wore the same dark wool jacket, a beaded pin fastened to the lapel, the colors of the Ute Mountain Ute flag, in a tight spiral. "About time," Jordan said with a practiced grin. "We were starting to think you'd run off with the gold already." "No gold," Mateo replied as he sat. "Just truth," Celeste scoffed. The commissioner arrived shortly after, a tired-looking man in his 60s with a limp and a steel pen that tapped steadily on the wood as he took his seat. "We're here to review the petition for injunction filed by Mr. Jordan Yazzie and Ms. Celeste Yazzie." The commissioner began regarding the land parcel held by Mr. Mateo Yazzie and the estate of the late Javier Yazzie. "Let's keep it civil." Lena stood first. "We're prepared to present both historical and legal evidence that supports Mr. Mateo Yazzie's stewardship of the land under the Cultural Preservation Partnership with the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, as filed and notarized 2 weeks ago." One of the opposing lawyers rose. "We acknowledge the filing, but we contend the land's mineral value, specifically the presence of high-purity silver ore, constitutes a misrepresentation of estate assets. My clients were unaware of these resources and are entitled to equal consideration in the distribution. Mateo's heart pounded, but he kept his face calm. "May I respond?" he asked. The commissioner nodded. Mateo stood and opened his briefcase. From it he pulled a thick folder and a small stone sample, one of the ore chunks from the mine. He set it gently in front of him. "My grandfather didn't hide this," Mateo said. "He preserved it. There's a difference." He turned to the commissioner. "This is wire silver. Ezekiel Yazzie, our ancestor, discovered it over 100 years ago. But when he realized what else the mountain held, sacred sites, tribal passage markings, cultural relics, he made a choice not to mine it for profit. He made a promise. That promise was passed to my grandfather, and now to me." He paused. "There is value here, yes, but it's not just mineral. It's cultural, historical, spiritual. This isn't about what we can take from the land. It's about what we're responsible for." The commissioner raised an eyebrow. "You're saying your siblings are trying to extract profit from a sacred site?" "Yes, sir, without understanding what's buried there or why it stayed buried." Whitehorse stood slowly. His voice was low, but it filled the room. "I was there when Javier made the decision to keep the mine hidden. He believed in honoring a vow. My people believe some places aren't meant for greed. That land, it holds stories that go beyond dollars." He walked to the center of the room and opened a worn leather journal, Ezekiel's. "This is his handwriting," Whitehorse said. "It details his agreement with the tribe. Not just a handshake, but a commitment. One sealed with silence. A silence Mateo has kept until now." Celeste leaned forward. "It's just a story. None of this was legally binding." Lena stood. "That's where you're wrong." She placed 3 documents on the table: the co-stewardship agreement, the cultural site assessment, and the legal approval from the Tribal Preservation Office. This site is now protected under federal tribal partnership law. Any attempt to develop or extract from it is a direct violation. The room stilled. Jordan's lawyer whispered something into his ear. His face tightened. "This is ridiculous," Jordan snapped. "You're turning a gold mine into a museum." "No," Mateo said, voice quiet but steady. "I'm turning it into a legacy." The commissioner leaned back in his chair. "I've seen my share of family feuds over land and money. But this is different." He looked at Jordan and Celeste. "You had every chance to come to this court with respect. Instead, you came with assumptions and greed." He tapped his pen once. "Petition denied." Celeste rose abruptly, knocking her chair backward. "This isn't over," No, Mateo said. "It's just beginning. For the land. For what it means." She hesitated, then stormed out. Jordan followed, his jaw locked. After they left, Mateo finally exhaled. Lena gave him a small smile. "You did good," she said. He nodded, throat tight. "So did you." Whitehorse stepped beside him, gaze calm. "You've kept the promise. Feels like it cost more than I expected. Real promises always do." Outside, the light had shifted. The sky stretched wide, pale blue, brushed with streaks of rose and gold. The air was crisp, clean. Mateo stood on the courthouse steps, looking toward the distant outline of the mountain. Leah sat on the edge of a planter, swinging her legs, a stick in her hand, tracing lazy circles in the dirt. When she looked up, her face was expectant. "Well," Mateo smiled, "we keep it." She jumped down and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. I knew we would, she whispered. He kissed the top of her head. Let's go home. As they drove back through town past the old general store, the school and the diner where Javier used to drink black coffee on Sundays, Mateo felt something loosen inside him. Not just victory, not just relief, but alignment. A sense that for once the right thing had been done, and done by the right people. The mountain was waiting as it always had been, watching. But this time it wasn't silent. This time Mateo could almost hear it breathing, not with warning, but with welcome. History lives not in museums, but in the hands that remember it. The first morning after the ruling, Mateo woke before sunrise. He stepped outside onto the porch barefoot, a mug of coffee warming his hands, breath visible in the crisp air. The trees swayed gently, pine needles whispering in the breeze, and far above the first orange blush of dawn crept over the ridge. Everything felt suspended, not in tension, but in clarity. Behind him, the cabin creaked as Leah stirred. He heard her feet hit the floor, the rustle of blankets, and the quiet creak of the kitchen chair as she sat to draw like she did every morning now. They'd stayed longer than planned. What was supposed to be a weekend visit had become 2 weeks, and neither of them had said anything about leaving. The bags they'd packed back in Cortez were still half unzipped by the door untouched. Mateo stepped down into the yard and looked out toward the old shed. The boards leaned harder now, weathered from years of neglect. But behind them was potential. He dumped the last of his coffee and went back inside. You up for a little work today? He asked. Leah glanced up from her sketchbook. On what rebuilding? She grinned. Finally. They started with the tools. Javier's old toolbox sat under the stairs, rusted, dented, but full of solid weight. Mateo sorted through it, setting aside what was still usable. A couple of hammers, 2 handsaws, nails stored in peanut butter jars. He found a crowbar a folding yardstick that still snapped into place with satisfying clicks. Leah carried out boards one by one while he cleared the ground beside the cabin. The plan wasn't complicated. Replace the old shed with a small outbuilding that could store documents, samples, maybe even serve as a workspace for visiting tribal historians. They worked slow, methodical. Mateo showed her how to square a frame, how to toe-nail boards to hold better, how to step back and look at the angle of the sun to know where the roof should lean. I like building things, Leah said as she hammered a brace into place. It's good work. Makes sense. Doesn't lie to you. She looked over at him. Like people do, yeah, he said softly. Like people do. By late afternoon, the frame stood upright, rough but solid. They stepped back to admire it. A small structure, humble, made by hand. Nothing grand, but full of purpose. They sat in the dirt eating sandwiches and watching the light turn golden. Do you think Grandpa would like it? Leah asked. I think he'd say it needed a stronger crossbeam, Mateo replied. But yeah, I think he'd like it. She pulled her sketchbook into her lap and began to draw the shed. The way she sketched wasn't casual, it was focused, almost reverent. You really love this place, don't you? He asked. Leah nodded without looking up. It feels like it's ours. The next morning, Lena arrived in a dusty government SUV, stepping out with a clipboard and a rolling case full of equipment. She wore her usual denim jacket and had her braid looped low over one shoulder. Behind her stepped 2 others, a young intern named Cal and an elder woman named Joetta, whose hands were weathered and eyes sharp. You ready? Lena asked. As we'll ever be, Mateo said, offering a hand. They spent the morning documenting the exterior, photographing every side of the cabin, measuring distances, taking elevation notes. Lena opened her case and began scanning the silver ore samples, logging metadata, while Cal recorded interviews with Mateo and Leah on a small camera. Joetta moved differently. She didn't talk much, just walked the land slowly, pausing at certain trees, running her fingers over stones, murmuring to herself in Ute. Later, she stood with Matteo near the mine entrance. "She's remembering," Lena said quietly. "What this land used to be, what it still is." Joetta finally turned and looked at Matteo. "Your grandfather walked with heavy feet, but his silence was not shame. It was protection." Matteo nodded, unsure what to say. "He wanted you to find it," she said, "when you were strong enough to carry it." After lunch, they descended into the mine. Lena filmed everything: the tunnel, the chamber, the journal pages. Joetta followed slowly, hands resting on the walls, eyes half closed as if listening to something beyond the human range. Cal set up a tripod and captured high-resolution scans of the petroglyphs. When they reached the small tunnel that led to the sacred chamber, Matteo hesitated. "You still want to go in?" he asked Joetta. She looked at him, then touched his arm gently. "I've already seen it. In my bones. You go." He crawled through the opening and entered alone. The chamber felt unchanged. Time hadn't touched it. Matteo stood in the center, turning in a slow circle. The altar, the carvings, the dust that never moved unless you moved it. He took a deep breath, not to speak, but to listen. In the stillness, he felt something he couldn't name. Not sound, not thought, but presence. He took out his phone, snapped a few photos for the record, then turned back. When he emerged, Lena studied his face. "Still okay?" He nodded. "Yeah, just full." That night they gathered around the fire outside. The sun had dipped behind the ridge and the stars blinked awake, bright and unashamed. Lena pulled out a flask, poured a little into tin cups, passed them around. Even Leah got a sip, hot cider spiked lightly with cinnamon. They toasted the land, the promise, the people before and the ones who came after. Joetta stood at the edge of the firelight, her voice rising in a soft chant, ancient words in the old tongue, carried gently on the night breeze. No one interrupted. No one recorded. When she finished, she placed a small pouch of cedar in Matteo's hands. "For protection," she said. "For memory." He didn't speak, just held it close. Later, when everyone had drifted into the cabin, or their trucks, Matteo sat alone by the fire, watching the last embers fall into darkness. Leah came out wrapped in a blanket. She sat beside him without a word. He looked over at her. "You warm enough?" She nodded, eyes heavy with sleep. He brushed her hair back. "You did good today. Really good." She leaned against him. "So did you." They sat like that until the fire was just a whisper, until the stars blurred above them, until the land felt quiet again, not empty, not secret, but understood. Matteo closed his eyes. History, he thought, wasn't something you studied. It was something you became. The land remembers more than we do, and it does not forget who betrayed it. The storm came fast. The sky had been clear when Matteo and Leah drove into town that morning, just a quick trip for supplies, lumber screws, and a few hinges for the shed door. By the time they were loading the last box into the bed of the truck, clouds had crept over the ridge like ink in water, turning the late afternoon gold into a dull gray shroud. Thunder cracked just as Matteo turned onto the gravel road. A sharp staccato warning. By the time they reached the cabin, fat drops of rain were hammering the windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. Inside, Leah shook off her jacket and laughed. We made it, but Matteo didn't laugh. Something itched at the back of his mind. A wrongness. Not just the storm. He double-checked the lock on the back door, then pulled the curtain back to look through the rain. The trees beyond the clearing swayed wildly. Shadows stretched where they shouldn't have. That night, the rain didn't let up. Wind howled through the pines and the cabin creaked and moaned like an old ship adrift. Leah had fallen asleep with her sketchbook beside her curled on the couch. Mateo sat in the rocker by the window, a rifle propped beside him. Not paranoia, just habit now. Then came the sound that didn't belong. Not wind, not rain, a metallic clink. He rose slowly, muscles tense. Another clink, faint but deliberate, the unmistakable sound of metal striking stone. The mine. He pulled on his coat, and boots gently shook Leah's shoulder. Stay here. Don't open the door for anyone but me. Understand? Her eyes widened. Is someone out there? I'm just checking. Stay inside. Lock up. She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around her. Mateo stepped into the storm, the cold slicing against his face. He moved fast, flashlight cutting a thin path through the dark. The rain made everything slick, and he slipped twice before reaching the trap door in the cabin floor. But it wasn't open. No, it was cracked. He hadn't left it that way. He descended, flashlight in one hand, other hand resting on the grip of his holstered pistol. The air inside was damper than usual, heavy with a smell he hadn't noticed before, burnt oil and fresh earth. He reached the chamber and stopped short. A crate was open. Silver ore samples were gone, and on the far side near the sacred passage lay muddy footprints. Recent. 2 sets. Someone had come in. Not for heritage. Not for history. For profit. He climbed back up fast, slammed the trapdoor shut, and locked it. In the morning, the rain had passed, leaving the yard soaked and scattered with branches. Leah helped him sweep the porch, both of them quiet. She didn't ask what happened, but she knew something had. Before noon, Lena arrived, tires grinding in the wet gravel. She didn't smile as she stepped out. They broke into the tribal office, she said. Mateo's stomach dropped. Documents were taken, she continued. Digital records, too. Someone accessed the archives. The backup drive is missing. The one with the footage of the chamber. Any sign of who? No security footage. Power cut before entry. But we have suspects. Mateo didn't need her to say it. He already knew Jordan, maybe Celeste, or someone they'd paid. They'll try to sell it, he said, or spin it. Claim it wasn't sacred. Lena nodded. They're setting up a challenge, a different kind. Not through the courts, through the media. Mining rights, historical ownership. They want to twist the story. He ran a hand through his hair, jaw tight. They won't stop, no. But we don't either. She pulled a folder from her bag and handed it to him. Inside were grainy photographs, aerial drone images of the ridge marked with red outlines and GPS data. What's this? Survey markers, she said. Someone's been placing them just outside the protected boundary, preparing for a dig. He stared at the map. On whose land? Private. Adjacent to yours. Long-forgotten deed from a trust in Arizona. The timing's not a coincidence. They're trying to skirt the edge. Get close enough to tunnel in. Yes, she said. And they're hiring a crew. Not locals. Mateo looked up, fury low and burning in his gut. They're going to crack the mountain open from the side. Lena's eyes darkened. Unless we stop them. Later that afternoon, Whitehorse arrived. He took the news in silence, then walked the length of the cabin, touching the porch beam they'd fixed the new boards along the wall. He didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "The land does not forget betrayal," he said. "They may dig, but it will not give freely. There is power below, old power. It has been patient, but it has limits." Matteo felt something cold run through him. Not fear, not exactly. Something older than that. "We need to warn them," he said. Whitehorse turned his gaze sharp. They were warned when they chose money over blood. Lena added, "We'll notify the council, file an injunction, but they'll act faster than law can move. Then we need people," Matteo said, "to bear witness. Cameras, journalists, someone outside their reach." "I know someone," Lena replied. "A documentary crew from Durango. They specialize in indigenous stories. I'll call them." As night fell again, Matteo sat with Leah on the porch. She looked at him, her expression serious. "They're going to hurt it, aren't they?" He looked toward the ridge where shadows gathered beneath the darkening sky. "They'll try," he said. "But it's not defenseless. Not anymore." She leaned into him. "I wish I could protect it." "You are," he said softly, "just by knowing the truth." In the distance, far beyond the trees, the rumble of machinery echoed faintly. Digging had begun, and the mountain, the old mountain that remembered everything, stirred beneath their feet. A man doesn't defend the mountain because it's his, he defends it because he knows it can't speak for itself. The sun broke over the ridge with a defiant kind of light, slicing through the morning fog that clung low to the ground like smoke. Matteo stood at the edge of the property line, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes fixed on the new cut into the hillside just beyond his land. Earth had been moved. Trees, young pines, maybe 30 years old, lay in rough piles. The soil had been churned like meat in a grinder, and fresh tire tracks scarred the slope where nothing should have been disturbed. Behind him, the cabin stood quiet. Leah was still inside drawing. She hadn't seen this yet. He didn't want her to. A drilling rig had been trucked in during the night. It stood there now like a blunt instrument, awkward, brutish, and utterly indifferent. A small team of workers were setting up barricades, marking their staging area, with survey flags and orange cones, as if that could justify what they were doing. Matteo stepped forward until his boots touched the boundary line. He didn't cross it. He just stood. One of the men noticed and gave a slow wave. He didn't wave back. Lena arrived an hour later, her SUV skidding slightly as it turned into the drive. She climbed out fast, already angry. "They've filed permits with the county," she said. "Claimed historical exemption for exploratory drilling. Cited mineral rights older than our protection clause. It's legal for now." "They're gonna punch straight into the heart," Matteo muttered. "They won't find it easy. The rock's too dense and the angles are wrong. But that won't stop them from trying." "What about the council?" "They've filed an emergency injunction, but it'll take days to process. By then," Matteo said, "they could gut half the ridge." Lena paced, hands clenched. "I spoke with the Durango film crew. They're coming tomorrow. We'll get Ariel's interviews, live documentation. If we can't stop it through law, we stop it through exposure," Good Matteo said. "Because this isn't just excavation, it's desecration." They spent the rest of the morning organizing. Cal returned with Joetta, who walked the perimeter silently, her expression unreadable. At times, she paused and bent down to press her fingers into the soil, as if asking it what had been taken. "They came through here," she said, once eyes scanning the trees. 3 nights ago. Used old service roads. No permits. No prayer." She said that last part like an indictment. By midday, a small crowd had gathered tribal elders, a few journalists locals who had heard whispers and come to see what was true. Some carried signs. Others brought folding chairs and sat in the clearing like they'd come to a vigil. Whitehorse arrived just after noon. He stood beside Matteo, arms folded. "They're betting no one cares," he said. "That the earth is silent, that silence means consent." "Then we make noise," Matteo replied. At 2 o'clock, Jordan showed up. He didn't come alone. A man in a pressed gray suit, sharp eyes, sharper grin, stepped from the passenger side of his black car and joined him at the edge of the drill site. Jordan approached the crowd like he owned the mountain. When he spotted Matteo, his smile widened. "Brother," he said, arms spread. "Come to see progress." Matteo didn't move. "You don't belong here." Jordan ignored that. "I see you've rallied the press. Very dramatic. But this land is outside your boundary. We're not touching your sacred stash. You're drilling into an ecosystem tied directly to the protected site. You're risking collapse, contamination, and cultural violation." Jordan tilted his head. "Prove it." "We will," Lena snapped. "Every second you're out here, we're documenting. Every sample, every blast. You want to keep pretending this is legal, go ahead. We'll see what the court of public opinion has to say." Jordan's grin faltered just slightly. "You always were the sentimental one," he muttered to Matteo. "Never could see the bigger picture." Matteo stepped forward. "The bigger picture is standing behind me, and it remembers who you are." Jordan's smirk disappeared. A low rumble split the air, the drill starting up. People turned. The noise was sharp, unnatural jarring against the backdrop of wind and bird call. It echoed across the slope like a threat. Then something happened. The ground shuddered. Not violently, not enough to knock anyone down, but enough to feel. A pulse. A warning. The drill screeched and sputtered. The foreman shouted something, waving his arms, motioning for the crew to shut it down. A hiss of steam escaped from a release valve, and the rig's tower groaned as it settled awkwardly to one side. Matteo's breath caught. "That wasn't a rock slide," Lena whispered. "No," Whitehorse said. "That was the land speaking back." The workers gathered, confused. One of them ran to the truck to make a call. The man in the gray suit barked something and walked off, phone to his ear, already agitated. A silence fell different from before. Dense. Listening. Joetta stepped forward from the crowd and spoke without raising her voice. "You trespass not just on earth but on memory," she said. "And the mountain has long memory." Jordan scoffed. "Are we really going to start talking to rocks now?" "No," Joetta said. "But they might start talking to you." As the sun lowered, the tension never quite faded. The workers didn't restart the drill. The crowd stayed. And Matteo stood in front of his grandfather's land, his daughter at his side, watching the light change on the face of the mountain. He didn't say it aloud, but he felt it. We are not alone in this. Not anymore. The mountain had spoken. Now the world needed to listen. There's a kind of silence that isn't quiet. It's watching you, waiting to see who you are when the dust clears. Matteo woke before dawn to the faint hum of generators and the low murmur of voices. The drilling crew hadn't left. They'd stayed the night, huddled in their trailers and trucks, just beyond the tree line, their lights piercing through the early morning fog like artificial stars. From the porch, he could just make out the silhouette of the rig, its crooked frame looming like a rusted skeleton against the sky. Nothing had moved since yesterday's jolt, the sudden shudder in the ground, the warning no one could explain. But Matteo felt it. Deep in his chest. Like something ancient had stirred and gone still again. He didn't bother with coffee. Just pulled on his boots, layered a flannel shirt over his t-shirt, and grabbed the cedar pouch Joetta had given him. He tucked it into his coat pocket without thinking. Leah met him at the door, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "They're still here." "Yeah," he said, "but they haven't started back up." She leaned against the doorframe, watching the trees sway in the early wind. "It's quiet. Not the peaceful kind." She nodded. "The holding breath kind." By mid-morning, Lena arrived with Cal and two new faces, the documentary team from Durango. One was a woman named Lila Sharp-Eyed with a mic clipped to her collar and a handheld camera already running. The other, Arturo, hauled a drone case and a boom mic over his shoulder like he'd done it 100 times. They wasted no time. Interviews were filmed, photos taken. The drone zipped overhead, catching wide sweeping shots of the damaged ridge, the drill scars, the people standing in protest just beyond the legal line. Whitehorse stood calmly in front of the camera, his voice even and deliberate. "You can claim rights to minerals," he said, "but not to memory, not to soul. This land belongs to more than paper can prove." Lena laid out survey maps. Joetta recited old stories, names of ancestors buried nearby. Mateo spoke last, not from notes, but from his gut. "My grandfather could have sold this land 10 times over," he said. "But he didn't. Because he understood what it meant. And I'm here to make sure that meaning doesn't get buried under someone's profit." By noon, the crew's tension was visible. One of their trucks was gone, probably for parts. Another worker stood arguing with the man in the gray suit, gesturing toward the rig. The vibration yesterday had buckled something in the drill column, cracked a stabilizer. Still, they hadn't packed up. Jordan showed up just past 2, wearing his usual smugness like armor. His sleeves were rolled up tie loose, as if pretending to be a man who worked the land. He didn't approach the crowd this time, just paced the edge of the site, talking on his phone, eyes flicking toward the cameras. "He's feeling the heat," Lena muttered. "He should," Mateo said. "But people like him, they get dangerous when they're cornered." As if summoned, Jordan walked over. "This is harassment," he said. "You know that, right? Filming private property." "It's public interest," Lila replied, not looking up from her lens. "You can't just frame us as villains." "You did that yourself," Mateo said. Jordan's mask slipped for a second. "You think you're noble sitting on that silver, pretending it doesn't matter. It matters more than you'll ever understand." A gust of wind hit the ridge hard, bending trees backward, whipping dust into the air. The rig groaned again, not from man-made effort, but from within. Everyone froze. The ground pulsed beneath their feet. Not violently, but steadily, like a drumbeat. Then silence. Not wind, not birds, not even the distant rumble of trucks on the highway. Just stillness. And then crack. A fracture split open across the drill site. Dirt crumbled. One of the outer support legs gave way and the rig tilted dangerously. Shouts rang out. Workers scrambled. The generator sparked. Smoke poured from the base. People ran. Mateo moved instinctively, pushing Leah behind him. Lena grabbed Cal's shoulder and pulled him back. The journalists filmed, unmoving. Then nothing. The rig settled, collapsed partially into itself, and stayed there. Jordan stared, speechless. Graysuit stood beside him, mouth half open. Whitehorse approached the edge, slowly scanning the exposed tear in the ground. Not deep, but wide. Black earth crumbled along the seam like ash. "That's not a fault line," he said. "That's warning." "Are you saying the land did that?" Jordan asked, incredulous. "I'm saying you were told." Mateo stepped forward. "Now you have it on film. You have evidence of risk of cultural violation of environmental damage. Jordan turned toward him, face flushed. You think this means you win? Mateo didn't answer right away. Then he said simply, it means you lost the mountain's permission, and that's the only thing that ever protected you. Jordan stalked off without another word. Graysuit followed, already dialing someone on his phone. The rest of the day passed like a storm aftermath, cleanup, questioning, rewatching footage. Lila interviewed the workers, now rattled and unsure. One of them admitted they'd been uneasy since arrival. Another described how their drill readings hadn't made sense. By sunset, the crowd was smaller, but the air felt different. Not finished, but shifted. Lena sat on the porch beside Mateo, both of them quiet. Leah was asleep inside, curled up next to her sketchbook and a pillow that smelled like pine. You think they'll pull out for good? She asked. Maybe not yet, Mateo said. But they're bleeding money, reputation, and the story's out now. The mountain gave us a gift, she said, a line in the dirt. It gave us a chance, Mateo replied. Now we have to be worthy of it. The wind returned, gentle this time, brushing the trees like fingers through hair. The stars blinked back into view. Somewhere far off, an owl called. Mateo stood and walked out to the new scar in the earth. He knelt, pressed his palm into the soil, not in reverence, in connection. Beneath his fingers, the ground was warm, not hot, not ominous, just alive. He whispered a quiet thank you, not sure who heard, but knowing someone had. We don't inherit the land from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. The wind carried the scent of cedar and dust as Mateo tightened the final bolt on the signpost. It stood just beyond the edge of the clearing, where the first slope of the ridge curved down toward the trail. Fresh pine planks, sanded smooth and etched with burned-in lettering that read, Sage Ridge Cultural Preserve Protected in Honor and Memory. Below it in smaller type, Ute Mountain. Ute Tribal Council, Partnership. Established by the Yazzie Family Stewardship Trust. He stepped back and wiped his hands on his jeans. The sun broke through the clouds overhead, catching the sign just right. For a moment, it glowed. Behind him, Leah was collecting stones to place around the trailhead. Not just any stones, flat ones she'd painted in the evenings after dinner, with symbols she'd copied from Joetta's stories. Sun shapes. Spiral paths, feathers, mountains. They weren't perfect, but they were hers. Honest. She looked up as he turned. Does it look okay? It looks more than okay, he said. It looks right. Lena came up the trail with a clipboard in hand and a tired, content smile. They've pulled out, officially this time. County confirmed the permits were withdrawn. Equipment's gone. No sign of Jordan. He won't come back, Mateo said. Not here. Lena looked around the clearing, then up at the ridge. What now? He let the question hang in the air for a moment. We finish what was started, he said. We protect it. Not just from others. From ourselves. From forgetting. Later that afternoon, the community began to arrive. It wasn't a grand event, no stage, no speeches, just folding chairs under the open sky, thermoses of coffee, passed from hand to hand, and the slow hum of conversation. Word had spread through the council, the local schools, even the university in Durango. Elders came, historians, youth with cameras and notepads. A handful of journalists this time invited. Joetta was one of the first to speak. She stood near the fire circle that had been dug with care and ringed with smoothed stones. My grandfather's grandfather hunted here, she said. He said the ridge held memory like a canyon holds wind. Quiet, but always there. We almost lost it. But we didn't. And that's not nothing. Lena followed. She held up a small metal vial, a sample of the wire silver. We took one piece, she said. Just one. For study, for story. The rest will stay underground where it belongs. Because some treasures are meant to be known, not owned. When it was Matteo's turn, he stepped forward slowly, hands in his pockets. The crowd quieted. I wasn't born to this land, he began. Not really. I left it for years. Taught history in rooms with no windows, read from books that forgot the names of the people who walked here before asphalt and fences. He glanced down, then back up. But the land remembered me. It remembered my daughter. It remembered my grandfather. And when we came back, it was still here waiting. So we listened. And it changed everything. He turned to Leah and held out his hand. She came up beside him, a little shy but proud. She told me something the other day, Matteo said, resting his hand on her shoulder. She said, "This place makes me feel like I'm part of something bigger, but it still knows my name." I think that's what a legacy is. Leah reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a drawing, the mountain sketched in charcoal and soft color, with the cabin nestled below, and rays of sun breaking through. At the bottom she'd written, "For all the people who listened." She handed it to Joetta, who took it with both hands and smiled through tears. After the gathering, people stayed. They walked the trails, touched the bark of old trees, sat on stumps and rocks, with the kind of reverence usually reserved for church pews. Children ran barefoot, darting between saplings. An elder knelt at the edge of the ridge and whispered prayers into the wind. By twilight, most had gone. Matteo stood near the trailhead again, watching the last car disappear down the dirt road. The fire circle still smoldered, sending soft gray tendrils into the cooling air. Whitehorse approached silently, carrying a folded blanket and the weight of something sacred. "I brought this from the tribal archives," he said. "It belonged to Ezekiel Yazzie. He carved it during his last winter here." He unfolded a wooden panel, aged and weathered but intact. On it, a series of interwoven symbols, Ut Dine and Spanish colonial, surrounded a mountain crest at the center. At the base, a carved phrase in careful, deliberate English, "Let the land be the voice." Matteo traced the words with his fingers. "I'll build a case for it," he said, "inside the cabin, where everyone can see it." Whitehorse nodded. "That's where it belongs now." The two men stood together, not speaking for a long time. The stars bloomed above them one by one, crisp and unafraid. Leah came out of the cabin, wrapped in a blanket, yawning. Matteo smiled. "Time for bed, huh?" She shook her head. "I want to see the stars." "All right. Just for a minute." They walked to the flat rock near the edge of the trail, the one she'd claimed as hers. She sat cross-legged, face tilted up, and Matteo lowered himself beside her. "Do you think the mountain's proud of us?" she asked. He looked out over the ridge where the outlines of old scars were already being softened by wind and time. "I think," he said slowly, "it's watching. And for now, it's at peace, also." She nodded, satisfied, and leaned against him. They sat like that, the two of them, under the vast, endless dark, not empty, but full of memory and promise. And when Matteo finally carried her back to the cabin, past the new sign, past the stones she'd painted, and placed by hand, he knew they weren't just protecting history anymore. They were becoming it.